Hi, I'm Patrick Cobb with AARP South Carolina. AARP South Carolina is pleased to sponsor the Post and Courier's Pints and Politics series. AARP is a nonpartisan organization. We don't endorse candidates nor parties. We work on issues important for families 50 plus in South Carolina. Follow us at aarp.org/SC.
Welcome to Pints and Politics. This is an event series of the Post and Courier and Palmetto Politics. Can I just, with a show of hands, please raise your hand if you have attended one of our Pints and Politics events before? A couple. So raise your hand if you've never been to a Pints and Politics. Wow, welcome. Skylar, this is kind of cool for us because we usually have a lot of repeat people. So those who've been here before, welcome back. Those who are joining us for the first time, we welcome you to this event series. Can't believe it. We have actually been hosting this series across the state. We're going on our 6th year. In May will be our 6th year. And today will be our, in the past 6 years, we've interviewed presidential candidates, U.S. senators, representatives, political columnists, and best-selling authors. And through the years, we've had about 10,000 people that have registered over 52 of these events today. So today we'll be hearing from South Carolina Attorney General Alan Wilson. Thank you for joining us. This is going to be recorded, so everybody who registered for this event will receive a recording in the next day or so. So please feel free to share this on. First, I just want to thank our subscribers, the people who support the journalism that we do. We've got a few of our political reporting team here today beyond Skylar and Nick. So we invite you to learn about what's going on in your community, what's going on in your state by becoming a Post and Courier subscriber. And also want to thank Savage Craft Ale Works for being our host tonight, so thank you so much. And also our presenting sponsor, AARP South Carolina. They've been with us for the last several years. They've been a great partner. I'm going to just turn it over to their state director, Charmaine Fuller-Cooper, to say a few words.
Thank you. I learned how to do that. My 3-year-old's in ballet, so thank you for being with us again tonight. So I'm Charmaine Fuller-Cooper, State Director for AARP South Carolina, joined by my colleague Joe Paulin Jones over there. So we're delighted to be with you this evening. I'm not going to talk long because I'm not the main attraction, but I do just want to say that what we do for all at AARP. AARP has worked with every presidential administration. We're nonpartisan. We work on both sides of the aisle on a multitude of issues. And for anyone who has not heard our chicken coop story before, raise your hand if you're familiar with the chicken coop story. So a few people. So AARP was founded by a retired school principal in the state of California during the 1950s. And Dr. Ethel Percy Andrews founded AARP out of a simple mission. She went to check on a retired educator. She knocked at the door. A gentleman answered the door and had no clue who she was checking on. And so as she was about to drive away, he said, "Wait, I think you're looking for the lady who stays way in the back of the property," because this was the 1950s, so properties were a few acres. And so she continued to drive around the property until she got to a chicken coop, and a little lady walked out. And she was a retired teacher who all she could afford was to be in this chicken coop with her small pension that she had in the state of California. And Dr. Andrews thought to herself, no one should have to live like this, especially after they've worked all their lives. And they needed to have health security and financial security. And that's how AARP came about. We were initially known as the National Retired Teachers Association, or NRTA. We eventually morphed into the American Association for Retired Persons. And now we're simply AARP because nobody in here wants to retire anymore. Alan, you might want to retire one day, though. But we're here, and what Dr. Andrews has said is what we do for all. And so we like to make sure that we connect people with information so that you're armed with facts and information to make your own decisions and your own choices to make your lives better and your family's lives better. But we appreciate you, and we thank you for being here with us this evening.
Thank you, Charmaine. I will say I am one of those that I love my job. I love it so much, but I do want to retire one day. So, all right. So let me introduce our guests tonight. All right. Misty, we'll have to be on the lookout. So Alan Wilson is now serving his 4th term as South Carolina's Attorney General after being reelected in 2022. He has served in the National Guard for more than 28 years, including a combat tour in Iraq, achieving the rank of colonel. In July 2024, he graduated from U.S. Army War of College with a Master of Strategic Studies degree. His tenure as Attorney General has featured significant legal challenges against the federal government, including litigation over plutonium storage and manufacturer protections. Wilson secured a record-breaking $500 million settlement, the largest in state history, regarding nuclear waste removal from the Savannah River site. And now I'll turn this over to the Post and Courier's political editor, Skylar Croft, and State House and Politics reporter, Nick Reynolds.
Do you?
Yeah. Much better. You hear me okay? Test, test, test. Test, 1, 2. Test, 1, 2.
Test, test. They can hear me.
Yes, no? Okay. All right, well, this is our traditional first question. We're in a brew pub. Do you drink alcohol? Do you have a favorite flavor of beer, or is there a cocktail you prefer?
So, after my first year in office, I made a decision that I wasn't going to drink alcohol until I left public service. And so I haven't had alcohol in 13 years. I don't drink alcohol ever.
So there's a chance that the next governor could be stone cold sober for the first time in the state's history?
Whoever that is, I just know that I don't drink alcohol. It's a personal choice. Actually, it started off as a diet. I was trying to lose weight, and I cut out sugar and pasta and bread and alcohol, basically anything that tasted good. I cut out for 6 months. And then after not drinking for 6 months, I said, you know what, I haven't drank for 6 months. I'm going to go another 6 months. Once I got to 1 year, I didn't miss it anymore. So I don't drink anymore. I enjoy going to places like this. I like the ambiance. I like socializing. But I'm a water man.
Fair enough. Well, let's get to the news of the last 2 weeks. I'm sure you saw that Nancy made the speech when she made her allegations and accused her ex-fiancé and several others of sexual assault, voyeurism. She also named you during the hour that she was on the House floor. Did you watch her address, and how were you alerted that it was coming?
Okay, before I make any comments to that question, I want to say this, and I'm very serious when I say this. Any comments that I make are about her comments directed toward me. Anytime someone makes allegations that they are a victim of a crime, those allegations should be taken seriously. They should be investigated thoroughly by law enforcement, and they should be treated with the utmost respect. So I make no comments regarding that. As it relates to how did I learned that she was going to do a speech, and actually received a copy of the speech the Sunday before, that Monday, the day before. And I got it from a local media outlet who had an embargoed copy that had been circulated the day before the speech on the floor of Congress. And so I was able to read the speech, and then I obviously was able to watch it on C-SPAN that night. So it was receiving a copy of the speech is how I learned that there was an allegation that that individual had made. And the allegation was never made to me. No one in my office. In fact, I actually called the staff and I said, hey, I want to scrub the servers. I want to scrub to make sure that there wasn't some email or some file that was sitting under someone's paperwork. The last thing I would want to know is that we were alerted to something and weren't acting on it. But in this particular case, I got a call back from the staff saying our office has received no copy of this. I actually called the chief of SLED. To inquire about this. He told me what they ultimately put out in a public statement, that they had some knowledge of this, but they had not communicated with us. So I learned about the content of the investigation literally from that speech that was circulated to the media the day before. Now, with that being said, I want to be abundantly clear. We did not receive an allegation. We were not involved. We were not even the agency involved in this. And normally, and then of course there was also a comment made I want to address. There was a comment made on the floor of Congress where someone alleged that a lawyer for a victim came to me with evidence of a crime, and I refused to accept documentation. I don't remember a specific conversation, but I have had people over the last 14 years I've been in this job come to me with allegations of criminal conduct, and they want to hand me the documentation. The first thing I say is, first off, You don't want to give me the documentation because prosecutors don't do the investigating. We can become fact witnesses. We become in the chain of custody. What you want to do is you want to give it to law enforcement. So don't give us the documentation, give it to law enforcement. That's what I would have said, and this is what I have said hundreds of times to people who have allegations of criminal conduct. So that is how I would address that allegation. As to the allegation that we do nothing or we have done nothing to prosecute that person's case, categorically false, untrue. I was at the State House with that individual. I was at a lighting of the menorah for Hanukkah in early January with that individual. I'd been with that individual probably 4 or 5 times since last summer. Never had that. They had mentioned anything to me about this allegation. I knew nothing about it. The biggest concern I have is not the allegations against me, because they're all false. The concern I have is victims are very important to me. And when you have a bunch of people out there who probably are victims of a crime and they're trying to decide if they want to come forward and they want to report, the last thing you want them to ever do is to second guess themselves. Should they report to law enforcement? Should they report to someone in government? Or should they even call a hotline? And I just don't want people to have the process. Like, so many victims advocates reached out to me that following week saying they felt like everything they had worked for years, for decades, was undermined, because now you have victims that are likely going to be less likely to come forward with an allegation of criminal conduct. And also importantly to me was the hotline. I don't fault anyone for wanting to create a hotline, but one thing you got to understand is we do all the training for all the victim services providers in the state, all the grants, all the hotlines are manned by people who receive so many hours of training. You're dealing with, first off, you have to have an understanding of criminal investigations. You have to understand what kind of information to take in when a victim is calling into a hotline. You're almost kind of like a social worker. You almost have to have clinical training because you're dealing with people who could have mental health distress and issues, maybe even suicidal ideation. So hotlines are 24-hour hotlines are manned by people receiving information in real time and getting that information to the appropriate law enforcement agency so an appropriate investigation can be done. An elected official setting up their own hotline in their own office that's not even being manned, there was a recording, concerns me because these people are not trained to do that intake. Do they know what information to get? Do they know how to treat the victim? Do they know who to give it to? So it was very disconcerting to many victims advocates and victim services providers around South Carolina because of that action. So the stuff that was said about me, to me, that's just politics. I don't think twice about it. But again, that individual should have their case investigated, which SLED is doing, and it should be done thoroughly. And hopefully they'll get a resolution to it at some point in the near future, and it'll be sent to the appropriate prosecution agency.
Just to clarify then, so no attorney, office staff, or go-between has ever approached you or your office about Congresswoman Mace's allegations?
No. I learned about it from a copy of the speech I received the day before. That's how we learned about it.
And what you said you heard from many victims' rights advocates. What sort of comments have you heard?
One person said that they felt like they've been working in this area for decades and they felt like their work was undone. You know, that they just felt very passionate about that they felt that this was a dangerous thing for someone to do, and they were very upset that they worked so hard to establish credibility in the victims' advocacy community, the victim services provider community. And they just felt like, you know, you're scaring off victims, you're undermining the process that's supposed to be there to support victims, and then you're creating a hotline with untrained people. That's what the victims advocates and services providers were telling me. They were very upset by it.
Congresswoman Mace has said it took her roughly a year to get a victim's advocate in this situation. She's never said where that came from, but she seemed to be pointing at you. Do you know anything about that?
No, I'm not going to comment or even call into question her allegations about how she was treated, about the underlying criminal offense that she alleged, or how she was treated, because we have nothing to do with it. So I can't comment. I have no insights into it. Again, if she truly did reach out to a victim's advocate, she should have been called back. But I don't have anything to do with it. It's not our role. We're not involved in that case.
And when she did this, she displayed, she attacked you personally, attacked your record. She also displayed a very, what I would consider an unflattering picture of yourself. Do you think that element of what she's doing, was that a political attack against you? And do you really see that as having anything to do really with her accusation, her main point?
Honestly, I'm not going to speculate as to what's going on in her mind, as to what motivated her. My concern was how it could have undermined the criminal justice system, how it could have undermined law enforcement, how it could have undermined victims advocates, victim services providers. And also, when you say I'm doing nothing, you're saying all the men and women. I have 300 employees, I have 90 lawyers, I have a number of folks who actually do work for law enforcement, support law enforcement. And when you say I do nothing, you're saying they do nothing, because I can't do nothing by myself if I have 300 people working for me. So I did want to address the allegations about my office and about me, not because I wanted to engage in a political tit for tat. And I'm not questioning her motivations. I don't care about her motivations. What I care about is the integrity of the Attorney General's office and the men and women, as well as the law enforcement community at large. That's who I was trying to protect.
Do you think 2026 had anything to do with the accusation she fired at you?
I'm not going to speculate as to what motivated her. I'll let all of your viewers and people here, they can have their opinions about that. Honestly, I don't really think about that person very much. I mean, I really don't.
Is there a reason why you're not naming her by name? You're saying that person. You've not said Congressman Mace once in our exchange.
And I won't.
Is what the reason?
I'm just not going to engage. I'm trying not to politicize this. I'm actually trying to steer it up. Again, I have concerns about victims advocacy and law enforcement, but I'm not going to engage in that. Again, she should have her case investigated by law enforcement, which they are doing right now. It should be done effectively, efficiently, and thoroughly, and whatever outcome is to come, it should then be sent to the appropriate prosecution agency, which probably wouldn't even be us. So I want that to happen. As far as everything else goes, I'm not going to mention names of people. I'm not going to question motivations, because, frankly, I'm not going to put fuel on the fire.
All right. Last question on this topic. Given the conviction of what she said and what you saw and what you watched, do you believe her accusations to be truthful?
I believe every person who alleges that they are a victim of a crime should be taken seriously. Their case should be investigated thoroughly by law enforcement, and it should be taken with the utmost seriousness. I mean, and that goes for me. So I accept for what she says. I'm not going to speculate beyond that.
On me, first off, thanks again for doing this.
Thank you, Nick.
You've previously said to people on the record that you're considering it. You've been working the circuit already. You've run for office plenty of times. Filing season's coming up. When are you formally going to make a decision on running for governor?
My gut. So I am considering it, but there's a lot that goes into that. It's not just me making that decision. It's my family. It's my friends. It's the office at large. And so I don't, whatever I finally decide to do, that decision will be made sometime later in the year. I don't know when. So I'm not going to, again, I may or may not do it. I am seriously considering it, though. But again, that's a decision I'm not making in a vacuum by myself. It's going to affect the lives of people in my immediate orbit, both my friends, family, co-workers, and so I want to be thoughtful about that process.
And by later in the year, you mean?
Later in the year, after today.
Okay. All right, so hypothetically, if you were to run, if you decided that this was in the best interest of you, your family, the state, what would your sales pitch be? What would you actually bring to the office, should you do it?
Well, I could say if I do run, I'll be happy to answer all those questions. But one of the things that, if I may take a step back, I want to talk about why I ran for Attorney General and back into the question. Because right now, if I'm not a candidate, I don't want to tell other candidates what my platform would be before I'm even a candidate. But I do want to talk about what drives me. When I was a younger prosecutor, and this is what drives me to be in public service, is I prosecuted a lot of child sex crimes. That just seemed something I did a lot of. Other violent crimes too, but there was this one particular case in which a young woman who had been sexually molested and assaulted over a 4-year period between the ages of 12 and 15. At age 17, she came forward. By the time she was 19 years old, that case had found its way in the Attorney General's office where I was a young prosecutor. And I went and I prosecuted that case, and after 8 days in the courtroom, the man that had done all those things to that woman was found guilty by a jury. And during the sentencing phase, the judge was reading out the sentence. He sentenced that man to 18 years. And as they were taking him off to the Department of Corrections, the young woman and I were walking out of the courtroom, and I remember this very distinctly. She said something along the lines of, I asked her, "Why are you crying?" Because her eyes were all red and misty. And she said, and before I tell you what she said, it's an important piece of information I left out. The man that had molested and abused her for those 4 years was a retired police officer and the girl's grandfather. And so during that conduct, that period of time, he would say things to her like, no one will believe you because I'm a cop, you're a kid. He would say things like, all I need is one juror to have reasonable doubt, and I walk. And he would say things like, if you tell anyone, it'll destroy the family. Well, the last thing that he said was true because half the family was behind her in the trial and half the family was behind him. But she looked up at me, now that you know that background. She looked at me and she said, Alan, I'm not crying because I'm sad. I'm crying because I'm happy. Because for the first time in my life, I'm not a victim, I'm a survivor. And that was really powerful to me. And as I thought about that statement, that woman was at a fork in the road in her life where no one had believed her for the entirety of her adolescence. And I got to play a role. There were other people there. There were investigators. There were law enforcement. We had a law clerk. I had another attorney that prosecuted the case with me. Victims advocates, court staff, the judge, the jury, everyone played a role. But my role, I got to play a significant role in being a voice to someone who had no voice as a young woman. I got to play a role in taking power from a person who had power in that person's life and giving it to the powerless. And so when I decided to run for Attorney General, I said, what drives me? And I loved my military service. Having served a combat tour and come up through years in the military, the challenges of leadership are what drove me. I loved the opportunity to be a leader when I could be. And then when this office was going to be vacated, I said, you know what? I love the challenges of leadership. I love being a prosecutor. I love being that bridge from victimhood to survivorship. So I decided to run for Attorney General and then do it kind of on a larger platform. And so for the last 14 years, I've been involved in, working on reforming the domestic violence laws, creating the the Human Trafficking Task Force, quadrupling the size of the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force, consolidating all the victim services in the state under the Office of the Attorney General. So now the Attorney General is the chief victims advocate for the state. I championed Emma's Law. I championed the Ashley Hall bill. I mean, so many laws that have such a big impact. This year we got $6.5 million for halfway houses for human trafficking victims. We've been going back and trying to grow our footprint for supporting victims of crimes, and it all goes back to that case. So your question was about what would my platform be going forward. I'm going backward on purpose to kind of let you know what makes me tick. That, just trying to empower people, defend the rule of law, promote public safety everywhere that I can, and then hopefully my record will stand on its own. Now, if I decide to run for governor, obviously you've got to broaden your platform to include, what are your plans for education, employment workforce? What are your economic plans? What are your plans for government accountability and transparency? These are all things, by the way, I've been thinking about these issues, not because I'm considering being a candidate for something else. I've been thinking about these things because I see government from a unique perch that a lot of people don't get to see it from. And so I have a lot of ideas that I think would be good for reforming our government in South Carolina, and I'm putting those ideas together so that in the event that I do become a candidate, I want everyone in this room, for or against me, will have access to my plans, and they can kick the tires and take it for a drive around the block.
Gotcha. And I do want to return to where the status quo is on some of the issues in state too. But in your time as Attorney General, you point to a lot of in-state accomplishments, but it's also hard to ignore that during that time you've also taken on a really pronounced role on a national stage as AGs have become a little bit more nationalized. Do you want to tell us a little bit about how you see yourself on that scope?
On the national level?
Yeah.
So, the Office of the Attorney General has evolved a lot. If you go back 75 years, there were 9 employees in the Attorney General's office. Now there's 325 people in the Attorney General's office over 75 years. And over the last 10, 12 years, the scope of the office has grown, not just in my state, but in every state, and in both parties. Republican and Democrat AGs have become bigger and more important in their respective states because the role of the federal government, how the federal government, no matter who's running Congress, who's running the White House, the government has gotten bigger. The government has got more involved in people's lives, and sometimes, we have created an administrative state, and the AGs, especially on my side of the aisle, have taken a very pro-rule of law position. And so, we have become more active. I've been very active in the Republican Attorney Generals Association. I'm the only Attorney General in the history of that organization most AGs serve one term as chairman. I've been a chairman 3 times, elected 3 times by my peers to serve as the chairman of that role because I really like the national issues. I really like, having a national footprint. And we've done a lot of bipartisan things. Obviously, the opioid settlement with South Carolina's over the next 15 years is going to get an additional up to $680 million for opioid abatement and remediation and treating people that have addiction. We did that. We did a national mortgage settlement, which was a bipartisan like the opioid settlement was. We've been involved in a number of issues on with some of these social media platforms with which are bipartisan in nature. And we've also taken a lot of positions that people would say are political. But I would tell people this: doesn't matter where you are on the political spectrum. Maybe you're on the far right, maybe you're on the far left, maybe you're somewhere in the middle. Every action a person takes in government or doesn't take is political. If I do something as Attorney General, people say, well, that's driven by politics. But also, it's political if you don't do something. Choosing not to do something is a political decision. So I've decided I'm going to be criticized no matter what I do on the national stage, but I'm just going to put my head on my pillow at night and sleep comfortably because I know that I did the right thing under the rule of law. And so that's what drives me.
Gotcha. And to ask this again, I mean, we've had political stability in the state for quite some time. You know, Governor McMaster is now the longest-serving governor we've ever had, but things are changing kind of soon. And I'm not asking you as Attorney General Alan Wilson, as South Carolinian Alan Wilson, do you think that the state's fallen behind anywhere, and what do you think the future should look like in the state?
I mean, we're on a spectrum. I mean, no one ever wants to say that we've arrived. I mean, no state, no government ever arrives at a place of perfection. So for me to say that, you know, they could do things better, listen, there's so much more we can do as a state. I mean, there's a lot more we can do as a state. I think there are a lot of people who they certainly feel disconnected from their government in Washington, D.C., which is why I think the last election turned out the way it did. But I think there are times I talk to people around the state, they feel detached from how government agencies in Columbia treat them in the hinterlands of South Carolina. I've talked to a number of business leaders this past week in the Low Country who told me that they feel like they have to fight their government in order to operate in the free market in South Carolina. You know, years ago, you know, and this is I'm gonna come back to your question, Nick, but I want to go out in a rabbit hole for about 30 seconds. I came up with a 5-way test I was on a long run one day, I was on Army duty, and I said, you know, what do I want government to be? What would make good government? And so government should pass a 5-way test. So everything that I think about government or want to do for government passes this 5-way test. Government should be responsible, predictable, accountable, profitable, and stable. And I'll say that again. It should be responsible, predictable, accountable, profitable, and stable. Now, the first three, government being responsible, predictable, and accountable, those are really the three primary legs to the stool of good government. The last two, profitability and stability, those are byproducts of good government, folks. A government where the elected leadership or the appointed leadership, they act responsibly with the power that you give them at the ballot box or through appointment by elected leaders, and they pass responsible bills. That's one of the prongs. Predictable. This is where I was coming back to what people are telling me and the business leaders are telling me. When government passes laws that create less predictability, or they pass regulations that create anarchy, and local business leaders and developers and business owners have to fight their own government through the regulatory framework, that lack of predictability, they have to hire lawyers and enforcement specialists and compliance officers, and the cost of doing their business gets passed on down to the end user, which is usually the consumer and or the taxpayer. So as I travel the state, I'm seeing people say, you know, I wish our government, and these are my words, I'm paraphrasing, but what I'm hearing them say is they don't think that all the people in government act responsibly with the power that they're given. We just saw, you know, down in North Charleston, obviously. We heard what happened with the federal investigation, not our office. But, you know, people are acting irresponsibly with the power they've been given, allegedly. People are not being responsible, or they're not being predictable. When you watch a football game, you know the rules are very predictable. You know all the players on the field, you guys, refs in the black and white jerseys, they're supposed to enforce the rules to create predictability so that one team doesn't get an advantage over the other. That's what the governor's supposed to do in the free market. The government doesn't always do that. Sometimes it picks winners, sometimes it picks losers, sometimes it has a preference. And that lack of predictability, it costs people. Accountability. Last year, I led, and I was going all over the state talking about judicial reform. This is something that was very important to me. The way that we elect judges up until last year, and it hasn't gone into effect yet, but there are 3 branches of government. You've got the executive, the legislative, and the judicial branches. But in the process for electing judges, the executive branch had no role in it. Now, I tell people the way we elect judges up right now is there's a 10-member commission called the Judicial Merit Selection Commission. And this is where we go to the accountability prong of my 5-way test. You have a 10-person commission, 5 members appointed by 1 member of the House, and then you have 2 leaders in the Senate that appoint the other 5 members. Okay, of the 10 members serving on the JMSC, 6 members are elected members of the Judicial Merit Selection Commission. So 6 legislators on a 10-member appointed commission determine who gets to fill a judicial vacancy. So a vacancy occurs, you might have 10 people apply, they pick their top 3 that are qualified, and they send them to the legislature for a floor vote. Right? In the process of selecting and electing and nominating, the executive branch of government has no role in that. And how do you hold the judiciary accountable when everybody in this room, you can vote for or against the governor, you can vote for or against me, but you can only vote for or against your House member and your senator. And there's 170 of them. And so when we were advocating for legislative tweaks to how we elect judges, I wanted the governor to be able to appoint all the JMSC members, because I think everybody can vote for or against one governor. You can hold a governor accountable more easily than you can hold 170 people. Our system used to be that power was concentrated in one branch of government while accountability was dispersed. And so you couldn't go anywhere and hold anyone accountable. So the accountability prong was failed there, and that's why I lobbied for judicial reform. We got about 75% of what we wanted. We didn't get everything, but we got a lot of what we wanted, and we're going to keep going back. But to your point, that 5-way test means something to me, and whenever I'm out there advocating for policies or laws or rules or regulations, it has to pass that 5-way test.
Gotcha. And I got one last question in that segment, but I heard you talking a lot about separation of powers in there. And as you know, right now we're seeing quite a lot of federal actions that some might consider unilateral. And in that role, the states do have a role to play, either in deciding to go along or push back. And I'm kind of curious, under current circumstances, what role you see a future South Carolina governor playing with this administration?
I don't really understand the question. What do I see? The current governor, any future governor, or?
Yeah, absolutely. We have a weak executive branch in this state.
Right.
There's only so much they can do. That's mostly in the hands
Right.
of the legislative branch. But currently in Washington, we're seeing actions that a large segment of the state's budget consists of federal funding. Lots of federal programs flow into the state.
Mm-hmm.
What action should the governor take?
So first off, the relationship, you're talking about there's federalism and there's separation of powers. One is a vertical relationship, the other is a horizontal relationship. Separation of powers is horizontal, meaning it's the 3 branches at the federal and state level that they stay in their lanes and they cooperate appropriately. And then federalism is the relationship between the states and the federal government. I always like to remind people, the federal government didn't create us. The states created the federal government. So keeping that dynamic in check is always going to be important to me as a statesperson, that the states are closer to all of you than the federal government is. Now, with that being said, we live in a system of cooperative federalism where obviously the states have given the federal government, certain powers. Some are enumerated, or all of them are enumerated, and that those powers should be used appropriately. And again, remember that everything the federal government gives to us, it has taken from us. So I want to make sure that relationship is balanced and that the rule of law was followed between the two. But again, there is a role for the federal government to play. We just had a horrible natural disaster that came up the backside of South Carolina up in the North Carolina with Helene. Obviously, we want a competent federal government that can respond quickly to those types of natural disasters. As a National Guard soldier, I've been in probably 10 hurricanes over the last 28 years. I was in the 1,000-year flood back in 2015. I've seen what boots on the ground at the right time and quickly deployed can mean to people whose lives have been absolutely destroyed and ruined. I've also seen what happens to those lives when the boots aren't deployed efficiently or effectively by federal authorities. So making sure that there's a good relationship between the federal government and the state government is important to me. You can have disagreements, but you need to learn to disagree without being disagreeable. You said something else, Nick, about the weak executive in our state.
Yeah,
I want to touch on that.
And I guess in this context too, there's a lot happening at the federal level. Seems like in some cases state governments are going along with what's happening at the federal level. Do you think that there maybe should be a more proactive role by governors to look out for their state's interests?
Sure, absolutely. That's the job of the governors, to look out for their state's interests. 100. This is the job of the Attorney General to look out for state's interests. But I want to talk something about the role of the governor. The governor, you are correct. compared to other states, the executive in the state of South Carolina is born out of the 1895 state constitution when we were coming out of Reconstruction, and of course people didn't want a strong executive after what they'd just gone through, so the power was basically kept in the legislative branch of government. Carroll Campbell did a lot in the late 90s or late 80s, early 90s to bring some of that power back to make it more accountable to the people. Again, I don't want to weaken the legislative branch of government. I just want the other two branches of government on par, and sometimes the executive been left out. But there are laws and constitutional provisions baked into our Constitution and our statutory framework. The governor has what I call hard power. And by the way, every person has hard power. That's the power you have from the laws and the constitutions, what they give you. As Attorney General, I have hard power. There's another thing. It's called soft power. It's your ability to get people to do things and be able to move people with the bully pulpit of the office you have, the ability to communicate with people who may not agree on you on every issue. You have to remember, there are going to be issues in which someone might be your enemy today but your best friend tomorrow, and vice versa. So being able to get those people to come your way is something that a governor or an attorney general or an executive could do. One of my favorite definitions of leadership was by Colin Powell when he said, leadership is the ability to get people to do what you want to do because they want to do it. And so sometimes the governor has to be able to go to the General Assembly and get them to do what they want the General Assembly to do because members of the General Assembly want to do. But if you go over there and you start yelling at the legislature, there's a time to fight, but there's a time to sit down with people, roll up your sleeves, and find an 80% solution. And I think that a good governor can do that. And so it is weaker than other states, but the office of the governor has the ability to exercise a lot of soft power, which is a very strong thing that the governor can do that no one else can.
All right, this is our AARP question as our sponsor. This is the first time we've had a state-level kind of question. It's mainly been federal. According to one of their studies, South Carolina ranks 49th when it comes to long-term care support. How can support for family caregivers be enhanced in this state?
How can
support for family caregivers be enhanced in this state?
How can care for family caregivers?
How can support for family caregivers be enhanced in this state?
Okay, that's a question I've never thought about before. I mean, it's a good question. It is a good question. So let me say this. So first off, we're currently involved in a lawsuit right now with the federal government that are putting regulations in that makes it harder for nursing homes in rural areas to be able to have an adequate number of people to serve. So the regulations are making it more difficult for us to have more caregivers in rural areas in nursing facilities, and that is something that I've been involved with on the legal side. That probably doesn't answer the question, but as the Attorney General, my role is a little bit more narrow than that. But what I would say to our friends, Charmaine back there, the AARP, what I would say is, as your Attorney General and whoever the next governor is, whoever the leadership is, they should be willing to go sit down with the folks at AARP or any other organization that represents various stakeholders on any issue and get their input and then try to implement that input into action. Whenever people come to me and want us to do something, I try to think, who are the stakeholders? Who are the agencies or the adjacent organizations that we might be impacting? Don't always catch them, but I always try to think about it. So my longer answer to the short question to the person that wrote that question would be, I would like to hear what their solutions are and then how they think I, using the power of the Attorney General, could help them achieve those solutions or get them to the right people to achieve the solutions. But let me tell you something. I'm going to tell you something that's going to shock all of you. I don't have all the answers. And any elected official that tells you they do is lying to you. But what I will tell you is that if I don't know where the answer is, you might have the answer, or you may know someone that has the answer, or we'll go find the answer together and then figure out the best way to implement it.
All right, you were also among the multiple supporters who went to New York to back President Trump during his hush money trial. He was found guilty on all 34 charges in a scheme to illegally influence the 2016 campaign through hush money to a porn star actress. You called this a sham. So let me hear you a very simple answer. Did the jury system work in this case, which is the basis of your career, and did it work?
I watched that entire trial unfold, and all I could think was the 1950s Soviet moniker, show me the man and I'll show you the crime.
Based on that answer, though, is the President of the United States a convicted felon?
Yes. I mean...
And calling that a sham trial, too, opens the door to criticisms for the legal system in South Carolina. Can a Democrat get a fair trial in South Carolina?
Absolutely.
Why would a Democrat get a fair trial here, but not a Republican in New York?
So first off, I can talk to you about my role as the chief prosecutor in South Carolina. First off, I have never allowed politics to come into the criminal justice system in South Carolina. People should not be, there's an old saying, you don't prosecute people, you prosecute conduct. And if you look at people who if you look at a certain person who's doing conduct that another person you like would do, that person wouldn't be prosecuted. But we're going to prosecute this person for the same conduct. Is it because of who they are or the conduct that they're doing? And so as the chief prosecutor, I always try to take the name and the title out of it. I have prosecuted Republicans. I have investigated Republicans. I have prosecuted and investigated Democrats. I have actually said no to investigating or prosecuting Democrats because the evidence didn't support the case. I've actually said we should prosecute this Republicans because the evidence did support the case. And again, that's not to say that in New York City, I sat on a panel with Alan, and the people out there that booed me, that's fine, we can agree to disagree. But I sat on the panel with Alan Dershowitz, who is a famous criminal defense attorney. He and I rarely agree on anything, and we were on a panel in front of 500 people last summer. This is the guy that defended O.J., okay? He said, and he's a liberal Democrat who was a big supporter of Clinton. He says, I still can't explain to you the criminal charges against Donald Trump. And he said that. That's not me. So you can laugh and snicker, but my position is this. Over half of this country weighed that in their calculation back in November, and it did not weigh a lot in their minds when they decided what direction they wanted to go.
All right. So after the November elections, President Trump gave a blanket pardon to some 1,500 January 6 rioters, some who were caught on camera assaulting police officers, some who were clearly involved in violence that day. Do you feel like that decision undermined the rule of law?
I don't know, Nick. Did Joe Biden's pardons undermine the rule of law when he retroactively, gave pardons going back? No, retroactively gave pardons back to 2014. Well, first off, a president can do whatever they want. I'm not saying that Joe Biden couldn't do what he wanted to do and Donald Trump couldn't do what he wanted to do, but you're asking your question. You're only asking half the question. Two men, one going out of office, one coming into office, both did the same thing, but we're only talking about the second man. So, look, it's the president's prerogative. Should that be changed? That's an honest conversation we can have. Should the Senate or the Congress have to weigh in on being able to approve pardons? We can have that conversation, folks. To people out there who are left of me or don't like Mr. Trump, I'm happy to have that conversation with you. But when you ask the question about Donald Trump did this thing, well, my God, at 11:45, literally before Joe Biden walked into the rotunda to turn over power, he basically gave his whole family a retroactive pass going back to 2014. Why?
This is an interesting jumping off point, though, and we talked about this last summer, but...
This is fun, by the way. I'm enjoying the I love it. Even the people that don't like me, I love you. This is great.
But during the Biden administration, you did sue over...
Sorry, my mom's waving at me.
Oh, that takes priority. Well, we talked about this last summer, about executive orders and unilateral executive power, and you filed a lot of lawsuits against the Joe Biden administration for some of these executive orders. There have been a flurry of those in the first couple of days of the Trump administration. Like, why? I haven't seen any lawsuits against the Trump administration's decisions. Like, what's the...
I'm sorry, they stepped on you. Say it again.
Okay.
More time for answering, less interruptions.
But we discussed
Can you give me a specific one?
About the Trump executive orders? There are a lot of them.
Yeah, but here's the thing. Presidents have executive authority to write executive actions. But what a president can't do is a president can't write an executive order that rewrites federal law. An executive branch agency can't pass a regulation that rewrites federal law. You can't, and you might like the outcome of what that executive action is doing. You might like the outcome of what that regulation is doing, but I tell my friends out here in the audience who don't agree with me on this, you give power to the federal government to do something that you like the outcome of. Once you give that power to them, they never give it back, and one day someone else has their hand on the trigger with that same power, and they're going to use that same power to do things where you don't like the outcome. So usually when I'm challenging an executive action, it's because the executive action violates a specific federal law or it's in contradiction to the rule of law.
All right, gotcha. So just simple yes or no question with this. As far as the early Trump EOs, do you think any of them have violated the law?
I have not read all of them, but the ones that I have, well, there's a lot of them, and I got a day job, but a lot of the ones that I have read that I do support. I'll tell you one that I support that a lot of people in here probably won't support. I think the way that we have interpreted the 14th Amendment provision of anchor babies, I think that has been a 150-year misapplication of constitutional law. And so there was an executive order that says we're going to reinterpret the 14th Amendment. That if you read the 14th Amendment, it says all persons born or naturalized and subject to the jurisdiction of the United States are citizens thereof. That's a paraphrase. Right now, for the last 100 or so years, we have read that statute to mean that all persons born or naturalized, period, are citizens of the U.S. And then if you have a baby here, then that baby anchors you here. Well, there's another provision, and subject to the jurisdiction thereof. At the time, if you read in context of tradition and history, as the Supreme Court is starting to do now, they look at what the words meant at the time they were written. The 14th Amendment was written to obviously bestow citizenship on emancipated slaves, right? Rightly so, but it wasn't designed to bestow citizenship on the children of diplomats serving in the United States from abroad. If you're from France, if you're from Spain, England, you should not be able to have a child in 1868 when the 14th Amendment was written and be able to say, okay, I can be here. I don't want Chinese nationals coming in here and then having a baby and all of a sudden that child is now a U.S. citizen. And when I'm talking about Chinese nationals, I'm talking about the Chinese government is actually sending people over the southern border for the to really undermine our Constitution, undermine our democracy. This is the Chinese People's Republic. You can't leave the People's Republic of China without their permission, so there's a reason you're allowed to come here. But that is an example of a reinterpretation of the 14th Amendment that is going to be litigated, and I support that executive order because I feel like the interpretation of the 14th Amendment has been wrong.
Let me jump forward. I'm going to interrupt and steal one of your questions because you kind of stepped right into the next one. Is you were saying the 14th has been misinterpreted, but let me read you the Second Amendment. And you support the right people's right to bear arms. It says, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. I would venture to guess that greater than 99% of gun owners in the country are not part of a well-organized, regulated militia. Are you interpreting the second to suit your political beliefs and interpreting the 14th to counter your political beliefs?
No. So first off, you understand what a militia was. Back in the old days, there was no army. There was no Continental Army. The militia was the people. Farmers would be called up to serve, and they brought their rifles with them. So history and tradition are important, Schuyler. Another thing, it says the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. That presupposes that the right exists already. The right doesn't come from government. The right comes from our Creator. It comes from nature. Rights. Your First Amendment, Second Amendment, the Bill of Rights does not come from the government to you, the people. You have these rights yourself. The government's job is to not infringe on rights that pre-exist. And so, the right to keep and bear arms is not something given to us by our government. It's something that we already have, and that is why I always default to err on the side of the right to bear arms. And you don't have to be a member of a militia, and the Bruin case and the Supreme Court has already said you don't have to be a member of the militia.
That's my question.
Gotcha. And I guess since we love gun-related questions, South Carolina still has a very serious issue with gun violence here. And as we were discussing some of the laws to maybe expand people's Second Amendment rights, we saw law enforcement oftentimes pushing back against some of those provisions. And I'm just curious in your observations of some of the laws that we've passed, what you've seen on the street. Do you feel like we're heading in the right direction for addressing gun violence? Do you think that there's any laws that maybe should be implemented to help combat the problem?
When I travel the state, I'm meeting with sheriffs, I'm meeting with prosecutors, I'm meeting with other local law enforcement leaders, and obviously, to me, the issue with gun violence it's not the gun that kills somebody, it's the person that kills somebody. And my position would be this. Hey, look, I mean, y'all can shake your head no, but Chicago's the murder capital of the world, and they got some of the most stringent gun laws there on the books. So creating more stringent gun laws to me isn't the answer. Obviously, there's a lot going on out there. There's a mental health crisis going on out there. That is one thing I'd like to talk about. There are people that are addicted to. There are good people who get addicted to drugs, that get addicted to opioids, and then they get addicted to these drugs, and when they can no longer afford the drugs, they engage in property crimes, which leads to violent crimes. We've seen this happen across the spectrum. So, I mean, obviously, going after the guns is treating a symptom. It's not dealing with the cause that was creating the crime to begin with. So when I talk to law enforcement officials, obviously, they want to go after, what's driving. I mean, obviously, the fentanyl that's being pouring into the streets, where, you're seeing a lot of meth, cocaine, heroin. You're seeing other illicit activities. We're having gangs pop up in this state now that weren't here 6 months ago, like Tren de Agua. They weren't here 6 months ago. They're here now. And so, these violent crimes, the vast majority of violent crimes are committed by the same people. And so, obviously, going after those people, a well-policed community, a well-policed, neighborhood, a well-policed school, making sure that schools are protected and safe. And again, when you talk about public safety, there's a lot of people here from across the political spectrum, right? But I think everybody wants to live and work and raise their family in a safe community. And I want the same thing. Now, we might disagree on how to accomplish that. But for me is when, if your question is going toward what should we do from legislation. Listen, I supported Ashley Hall bill, which was a mental health bill that required people who are adjudicated mentally ill, so their constitutional rights are protected in the court of law, would not have access to a firearm. And that was born out of a case involving a woman that showed up at Ashley Hall School in Charleston and tried to pull the trigger, and it didn't, thank God it didn't go off. But that goes to that, and it was trying to close that loophole for mentally ill people. I have no problem with common sense reforms, but I just don't want to do anything that's going to infringe on the Second Amendment. But I think we can still protect our communities for active, aggressive policing.
Republicans in the State House are pushing their own DOJ bill. Question for you. You talked earlier about how big the Attorney General's office had become. How many people do you have to let go for you to now reach taxpayer efficiency? Everyone's saying government's too big. You talked about how big it is. Do you have too many employees?
Skylar, a third of my office has gotten bigger because it was consolidated from other agencies. Heck, just in the Crime Victim Services realignment, they put 60 people up under me from 4 other agencies. So, it's not like we're growing government, but we are the mandate. Obviously, the internet didn't exist in its current capacity 30 years ago, and now it's everywhere. It's in our pocket. Everyone here is filming me right now, and it's going to be on social media tonight. Predators, pedophiles, gangbangers, they're using the internet, so we have to be just as advanced as they are.
But
so
you're defending the size of your office at the same time when the federal government is laying people off. People are trying to defend the size of their offices there. Is our government fine as opposed to the federal government just getting too big, or you don't agree with what President Trump is doing? There's just a movement out there to shrink government. Does the AG's office need shrunk as well?
It's not about shrinking government. It's keeping government confined. Right now we're growing government at a rate far greater than population plus inflation. I think population over the last 10 years grew at 2.9%, but I think spending in state government grew by 5.9%. I think we should keep those things closer in touch. It doesn't mean, listen, we can't operate our government with a 1865 South Carolina level government or a 1965 or a 1995 government. We're with nearly 6 million people in the state of South Carolina right now, and 30 years ago it was half that. There's a lot of people moving here, so obviously we have to keep the demand. It's not about shrinking government, it's about keeping government in check. That's what I'm talking about. Now, to your comment about DOJ. And we're using the term DOJ. That I never heard of DOJ before 4 months ago, right? Before 4 months ago, before the election, I not heard the term DOJ. Maybe it was out there. I had not heard it. Department of Government Efficiency. Some people like the name. Some people hate it because of what they think it represents. But I've been thinking about holding government agencies and government actors accountable for far longer than this term has been out there. So I kind of borrowed the term and I wrapped it around an op-ed that I did a week or two ago about bringing a DOJ-like entity to South Carolina. Here's the thing. We've already got the pavers laid for it. We've already got the pavers laid for it. And I don't know if you're going to ask this question. I don't know if you want to go down the DOJ lane, but I'm happy to tell you what my idea is.
You were talking about it earlier.
You want me to do that
yeah,
again?
Please.
Okay, I didn't want to step on you. Okay, so we have the State Inspector General's office, okay? And it's designed to go out and catch fraud, waste, and abuse that doesn't rise to a criminal level. So people can be abusive or do certain things that might be bad government but doesn't rise to a criminal level. So what normally would happen is maybe it was a school district, a municipality, a state agency, some government actor misspends money or doesn't follow the law or acts in an abusive way toward a citizen. A complaint is filed through either the delegation or if it's a school district, maybe the superintendent. It goes to the State Inspector General's office. They go and they investigate that one incident and then they issue a report. And that's it. That's kind of like if you get robbed, okay, or someone breaks into your house, you call the sheriff's department, they come out, they do a complaint, an incident report, and then they will investigate that one thing. IG's office does work like that, but it should also work like this. Consider this. Tonight when you drive home, everybody here who's thinking about having a beer, have you thought about how many beers you should drink before you get in your car and drive home? Why are you thinking about that? Because she said the cops. Yeah, right. And you know what? I'd be thinking the same thing. The police are out there. You have highway troopers and law enforcement that are like randomly driving around and enforcing traffic laws just by being present everywhere. And think of the amount of people who watch what they drink, they don't drive recklessly, and they don't speed. There's a deterrence effect there. Now, yes, there are people who do drink and drive. There are people who do drive recklessly and speed. But we catch a lot of them with the efforts out there. Why don't we have an State Inspector General's office that operates like a Department of Government Efficiency that is broken down and it randomly does audits and investigations of local government, school districts, county government, state agencies, the Attorney General's office. We should run our agencies like at any given moment, a group of auditors can come in and interview my employees and look through my books. That's how we should spend the money in the Attorney General's office. That's how your school district should work. That is how your local municipalities should work. I would support that. I think people would be more accountable. For the agencies that do a good job, that report should be put on a public portal, and they should be praised effusively. For the ones that don't work or who are doing a bad job, that should be in a report. For the ones that rise to a criminal level where they're actually embezzling or stealing money, that should be kicked to the Attorney General's office. So I do think we can build on the pavers that we already have on the ground with the State Inspector General's office, and this is something I'm strongly advocating for.
All right. I got to end it there. That was a quick hour. I appreciate it all. It's a good project. Thank you for being here. I want to say thank you again also for South Carolina AARP for being our sponsor. Please sign up for our newsletters and Savage Ale Works. Thank you. We're gonna, just a second, let me finish. We're going to finish up with a couple quick fire questions, so just stand by. Ready? Mustard, vinegar, or tomato?
Mustard.
You recently wrote a letter to Costco saying that they need to change their DEI policies. Are you a Costco member?
I'm not a Costco member.
Have you ever had their $1.50 hot dog?
I have not, but I'm open to it.
Yeah. Imagine that it's a sunny day in Mar-a-Lago. You're talking to President Trump. The time has come. What do you say to earn his endorsement?
For what?
Run for governor.
Well, I haven't decided I'm doing that yet, so.
Have you talked to him since the election?
Briefly.
Okay. All right. Very good. All right. Thank you all very much.